and I am the Associate Director for the Center for Family Care of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. And we're back with another wonderful webinar today. The title of our webinar today is Tools for Promoting Mental Wellness in the Orthodox Families. And we have two wonderful panelists here with us today. I will introduce them shortly, but I want to go over a few little housekeeping notes of how these webinars work. First off, especially for those of you who might have little ones running around under your feet as you're watching this, we are recording this and we will post it about a week from now. So you can watch it again and watch it with other people. Matter of fact, that's what we really want you to do. Everybody can't, at their parishes or wherever they live, fly in these experts to your communities through these webinars. It's our hope that you sit down with, fellow parishioners, with friends, and rewatch these and continue the conversations that we bring up in these webinars. So we will post this in about a week with some discussion questions and so forth so that you can watch it. Now, this is interactive and it is live. So if you quickly scroll around on your screen, at the very bottom, there's actually several different things at the bottom of your screen. One says chat. We're not going to use that, but the Q&A, if you click on that, you can ask a question of our panelists, okay? There are a lot of you in this room with us today, and we're so blessed to have you here. We don't know how many questions we're gonna get to, okay? We might not get to them all, but we're looking at this as a beginning discussion of this topic. This is a huge topic, mental wellness, mental health. It's one that we're just starting to talk more and more about in the church and how to promote mental health and such. I want to talk about one thing because it's such a huge topic. We might not get to everything that's underneath the scope of it today. We definitely will not get to everything under the scope of it today. And if you're someone who is struggling with mental health issues, or you have someone in your family that is struggling with mental health issues, this webinar will be nice to listen to, but really you should refer back to your local parish, your local mental health professionals, your doctor, your local doctor, to try to find help. This webinar is meant to inform and provide information on how to get you connected with people locally as well, but that has to happen locally. We're not going to be able to address all the issues here today, but hopefully going forth we can continue having these conversations. So today I also want to thank, as always, Leadership 100 for their continual support. It is through their support and the support of faithful stewards like yourself that we're able to offer these webinars to you at no charge, and we feel very blessed to do that. So our speakers, our panelists that we have with us today, we have Dr. Georgette Constantinou. She is the retired administrative director of the Pediatric and Psychology Department at Akron Children's Hospital. She's associate professor of psychology at Northeastern Ohio University's College of Medicine. And she's a pediatric psychologist who's maintained an active clinical practice since 1978. So she has a ton of experience, and she specializes in chronic illness and trauma. We also have with us today Father Jerry Hall, who received his BA, Bachelor's in Science, BS, in pharmacy in 1979. And he had a strong desire to serve the Lord, and he left his pharmacy career, and enrolled at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. He was ordained to the priesthood in Akron, Ohio in 1988, and he was installed as their Proistamenos in 1995. He and his wife have been blessed with 4 sons and 1 grandson. So welcome, Georgette and Father Jerry. We're so blessed to have you here. I think to kick it off, let's just start with a definition of what mental wellness is and how that impacts our lives and our families.
I'll be glad to start, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Melissa. And I'm very pleased to be doing this webinar with Father Jerry because we work together in our own parish to promote mental well-being for all of our parishioners. We live in a very difficult and challenging world, and we want everyone to be able to cope with being in that world. And so mental wellness and mental health is about being able to handle the things that come at you, whether you're an adult or a child, have coping strategies to get through them, no matter what that might be able to deal with life's ups and downs, and find enjoyment and pleasure. Of course, our Orthodox faith is kind of the underpinning of that, but in the bigger picture, we want people to be able to handle life as it comes at them. And this is true for children as well as adults. That's not the textbook definition of mental well-being, but for me, it means if you're a child, you can function in school, you look forward to going, you have good relationships with your family, you're able to establish a peer group, you can function in a situation that might be distressful or challenging, and come out the other end. We've used a new term in the mental health world lately in the last 10 years called resilience. Kind of that, what is the ability you have to bounce back from life's bumps? And for some children, that could be not being chosen captain of the team. For another child, that could be dealing with the news that they have a cancer diagnosis. It runs the full gamut, and that's kind of how life is. And so we want our children to have those coping skills, even from a very early age. Father Jared, would you have thoughts about adding on to that?
Yeah, I could say, and thanks for Melissa, thanks for this opportunity to be here, and I appreciate sharing this time with Dr. Georgette. One of my favorite kind of letters to go to from this one book called Letters from a Russian Monk, and I often remind people of this, and we're just talking about people going through life's difficulties, and the monk is writing to many different spiritual children, and he was writing to a spiritual child who had written to him about why some people are having peace in their life, and other people are really struggling, and what he says to them is, he says, when you have peace in your life, or when you have peace in your life, just be thankful. When you're struggling, know that peace is right around the corner. And so it's just such good advice to be reminded that there's this kind of ups and downs and pattern in life in terms of the things that challenge us. And so I would agree with Dr. Georgette about the fact that no one's without challenges in their lives, whether it's grief, disappointment, failure, depression, and wellness is really about having that ability to recognize those emotional challenges that we face, and then to successfully walk through those until we find resolution. And it's not just like a mental exercise, but it also involves some of the spiritual disciplines as well. Finding grounding and strength in prayers, in the sacraments, in the spiritual counsel. All of those things really come into play, and I think determine and define who we are in terms of our mental and spiritual well-being.
It's really a holistic, everything kind of coming together.
Absolutely. It's totally a holistic kind of thing, so we can't just pick apart, just thinking about our emotional well-being without also realizing that it affects us. It affects us spiritually, as does the physical challenges that we have. Not only if you have a physical diagnosis that we're struggling with, it can cause us to have mental health challenges, which also can be a factor in our own spiritual well-being. We're totally an integrated system of body and soul and heart. And so as I said, this resilience we have affects all of those different things. And so just like from a very kind of a very simple standpoint, just thinking about our prayer life, that's something that we might take for granted. But if we're really struggling with a physical challenge or emotional issue, sometimes just having that thing in our life can become a big distraction to be able to like find that place of peace where we can actually really enter into some some quiet prayer, where we can quiet our mind and our thoughts so that we can experience God's presence.
Mhm.
Something that's very interesting to me, to follow up with what Father Jerry just said, is that in the secular world, when people are talking about stress reduction, they're using non-Orthodox language to talk about really almost the same thing. They're talking about meditation and mindfulness, which is almost a substitute in the secular, non-religious, for quieting yourself down, finding your inner peace, praying. So it is that I think everyone's trying to get to, pushing out the external world that's bombarding all of us. I was in New York City over the weekend to visit my adult children over Thanksgiving, and everywhere I looked, every place I went, people were, children, teenagers were connected to this little machine, this little iPhone in whatever form. People were sitting next to them. They weren't talking to one another. They weren't looking at one another. They weren't making the human connection. And I know that Father Jerry and I, about a month and a half ago, Father Jerry was wise enough to bring a film called Screenagers to be shown at our church, to talk about the amount of screen time that is bombarding our children, to the point that they're becoming addicted to the video games, to, I put it back up again, to these little machines where we have to try to disconnect them. And I think even in our own Sunday school class, we have made a rule that we've got a little basket and we say there can't be anything going on that's that important, that more important than learning about our faith and learning about one another. Put up the phones. And with a few grunts and groans, they do, and realize that it isn't necessary, that people are going to be, the interconnections among us are going to be the things that help us and keep us healthy. Sorry about that, but that's my little commercial. I will say
No, it is. And that's like a whole topic that we could go on. And I felt like myself wanting to say more and more about that, but we'll save that. We'll save that. Yeah, it's definitely an area that needs to be explored more. I'm wondering, Georgette, if you could give us a little background, because sometimes when we talk about mental health issues, people say, well, that doesn't really impact my family. We don't struggle with those things. And there's just a few people that have those issues. But it's actually quite a few people that struggle with these things. And at some point, I'm wondering, does everybody struggle at some point with these issues? What is the prevalence of it, especially with children? Because we don't think that children have the stresses that adults have. But so could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So let's just begin with the concept of we are all human beings who experience emotions. We also behave in certain ways. So our behavior and our emotions can get out of whack. And to me, mental health is something that is on a continuum. So I can be emotionally very stable and healthy one day and have a bad hair day where something's very stressful, I'm very upset, I'm angry, and it takes me a whole day to calm down. But the next day I go back to my normal. I don't stay at that level. I would consider that a person who's emotionally pretty healthy. Or a child, if a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old may pitch a temper tantrum because they don't know how to calm themselves, they don't know how to experience someone putting rules against them, and they have a bad moment, and they settle down, and they come back to their normal. When I talk about mental health issues, whether I have a diagnosis for that or not, I'm concerned about someone who cannot get back to their normal, for whom one bad day begets another bad day, begets another bad day, and they basically stop functioning. as they should. They have difficulties in school. They have difficulties in their peer relationships. They may be plagued by nightmares or sleep problems because they're so wired, or the events of the day are coming back to haunt them. And they kind of they can sit that way for a long time, or they can go into a very downward spiral. If I could share with our listening audience how prevalent mental health disorders are in children, it is the #1 problem across the world in children, more prevalent than any other disease or illness. In the United States alone, the numbers, and we think it's underreported, is 1 in 5 children are having problems significant enough that they really need to be working with a professional. Those are astounding numbers. 1 in 5 is 20% of the child population is hurting. And that number came some 15 years ago, and we think the numbers are even rising. So #1, when we say it's underreported, a lot of families fear that a mental health issue is a stigma for their family, may mean they're not parenting well enough. And the reason that I bring up all the outside factors that are impacting our children is there's a lot going on in the world of children these days. And it's not a failure of anyone if a child is having difficulty coping. Now, I want to make a statement for all the people who are listening, which is that I'm a prevention nut. I would rather that someone identify a problem and get help for it when it's a wee little problem than when it's huge. I worked for my entire career in a hospital setting where no matter how many individuals we hired, we could have doubled the size of the people that were there to help kids. That just tells us how prevalent the problem is. But I'm a big advocate of grab it while it's little. It's so much easier when you see a problem that you think needs to be addressed. You do the best you can as a parent. You check with your clergy, you check with teachers, you see if you can handle it yourself. And if you see that nothing you're doing is making a difference, then I think you say, this is bigger than I can do by myself. I need some guidance here.
And what does that look
Georgette,
like? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Father.
I was just going to say, Georgette, what do you think is the biggest barrier that parents face in terms of coming to terms with a mental health issue in their family, in their child, and to begin dealing with that?
Well, that's a great question. And then there's a couple of answers. For some families where mental health, and we are learning more and more that there's a genetic component to a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety problems. If this has been generational and someone didn't get help before, it can be very frightening to think, oh my gosh, my child is just like my grandmother. My grandmother was depressed all of her life. Now I see this in my child. So there's that kind of familial issue. There's also the issue of, I think, the bigger one is thinking that you failed, thinking that, you know, that there's a problem in your child because you haven't been a good enough parent, and exposing that. I also think that there are lots and lots of parents who are experiencing anxiety or depression that isn't treated. And it's frightening for them to think about, gosh, is this also happening in my child? So if they haven't faced it in themselves, they're really not comfortable thinking that, hey, now my child is looking like they might grow up to suffer some of the things that I suffer.
Yeah.
That's been my experience.
Excellent. Yeah.
And I've always heard the likening it to any other kind of illness. You would never say to yourself, if your child got the flu, my goodness, I'm such a bad parent. I can't go, why did I let this happen, or something like that. But somehow with mental health issues, we tend to, internalize it a little bit more. And earlier you were kind of talking about, to get help early. What exactly does that look like? If a parent has a concern, where do they go, and where do they start?
So one of the things that we've always done at Akron Children's, and now nationally, is that we've helped our pediatricians be open to families that go to them to talk about behavioral and emotional problems. We ourselves have placed a mental health therapist in every one of our pediatric offices, so families don't have to go anywhere. They can just work with their pediatrician and the therapist that's there. But I would always start with my pediatrician, because many of them are trained to help put out the small fires. Preschoolers temper tantrums, preschoolers biting behaviors, things that are pretty much the low end of the problems. They're also trained, again, many of them are expected to do screenings for depression. That's common practice across the country for every child over the age of 12 to get a depression screening when they go. A lot of families are very upset about this. And we're saying this is part of good health care, not mental health care, but total health care. So I would always ask a family to go back to their family practice doctor or their pediatrician, because they know who they think is good in the community. You don't have to do that, but I like to know that a child has had a good bill of health, clean bill of health from their pediatrician. They could be anemic, they could have something else going on, they could be suffering from migraines, which might need to be addressed. Lots and lots of things could come up. So I really like to start there.
That sounds like
another thing that I think that's valuable in terms of the church participating in that process too is just trying to have, trying to be as a clergyman, or even as youth directors in parishes or Sunday school teachers, to try to be as like available and approachable as possible to the kids, because sometimes whether you're having a conversation with them that's that could be just sort of designated as spiritual counsel, or sometimes they kids will obviously as a priest they come to me in confession, and it's many times that in those kind of conversations that things come up that kind of give you some hints to some mental or emotional, illness symptoms that sometimes kids and even adults, this happens as well, sometimes will be having these symptoms and they will equate them with, some kind of sinful behavior. And so I think there's an opportunity there in talking with, with them to help them, sort out some of these issues, and to realize that certain things that might be going on. So like I said, sometimes in those conversations, whether it's spiritual counsel or confession, you start hearing things that people are equating maybe as sinful behaviors, things that might be symptoms of some issues or mental struggles that they're having. And so this is an opportunity to try to help kind of make some discernments about those kind of things, so that kids or adults can understand their own behavior, and then encourage them to start sorting these things out for themselves and giving them some tools in terms of how to deal with these things appropriately. Whether it might be then saying, we need to talk to your parents about this, or have you talked to your parents about this particular struggle or this particular behavior that's happening? And so maybe that's where we can, enter into kind of a teamwork approach of helping then the family acknowledge this. Sometimes parents are seeing things and they're afraid to say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, just again, because of maybe their own insecurities or just fear about what their child might be going through. So in all of those kind of, those opportunities to help them have a realization that this is a real issue and that there are ways to help their child become healthier through that.
I was going to add, I've been a Sunday school teacher for either the middle school students or the high school students for over 25 years, maybe even a little longer. And one of the reasons that I did that was to kind of be around, so to speak, to kind of speak for the fact that, we have a psychologist who's one of our Sunday school teachers, ew, but kind of like, yeah, I'm a real person and you can talk to me. And every so often I'll sneak a conversation into the Sunday school topic at hand about some teenager or child that I've taken care of and their struggles and how they overcame them. Because I really think that you need to have kind of a background culture in the church of acceptance of it's okay to have a problem. It's okay to come forward and ask somebody to guide you or to help you. There was a shooting in the summer right before we ended Sunday school, and I looked at the kids in our classroom and I said, if you're ever feeling that you're violent or you're going to hurt somebody, you find me or you find Father Jerry and you come to us. So what I'm saying is, I think the more that adults who kids can relate to, whether they be a psychologist, whether they be their clergyman, whether they be the youth director, can accept them, isn't going to judge them, is going to help them. Kids need to know that. They need to know that there's adults there that they don't have to do it all alone. And that I think you work hard in a church to create that atmosphere of acceptance. Trust me, when I was supervising our basketball tournaments, I had more than one occasion to tell my son and his friends some lessons about how you treat people, how you accept people, so that they'd hear it from me. And I think we have to, as parents now, not necessarily as professionals, give that message out. I think we're the role models for how you don't judge. And if you don't judge, then I can come to you and say, I'm hurting. I've got some ideas in my head that are scaring me, whatever it might be, whatever it might be. So to me, that's something that we can all work on.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of just honesty about our own lives. And I think sometimes that's the other thing that people aren't aware of just everyone's own family dynamic, and they might look at one family situation and think, oh well, they don't have this to deal with or that to deal with, and so they can't possibly understand what I'm going through. And so I've had opportunities to talk about just my own situation, my own family situation, where we went through some difficulties with one of our kids who was experiencing depression, and so we knew what that did to our entire family situation, and how that affects everyone in the family. And so just having some honesty about that with other people gives them the freedom to be willing to say, this is my struggle. And I think sometimes just in being able to say that this is my struggle gives people a sense of a willingness to share that, and it doesn't seem like it's like an overwhelming burden or something that they can't overcome or deal with.
I also think when you do that and you say, we struggled and we overcame this and we found a way to solve this, this is hopeful for folks. You want hope. You want optimism. People who are hurting often don't think that there's ever going to be an end in sight. And so I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that people understand that help's available, people get better. The same thing is true, as you said before, Melissa, when you go to a doctor. You're going to your physician in the hope that they have something to help you with whatever it is you're struggling with. So the church is a healing community, and I think that it's our responsibility to make it a place where people can share. Both Father Jerry and I have had those moments when someone's standing right next to you, real close, wants to say something, and you take the time. You simply take the time because you know that they've got something powerful that they want to share. And from my perspective, I feel very grateful that they've chosen me to share that. Can't tell you the number of Sunday school kids that are just going to hover over my desk with some problem. And I would say, okay, Lord, give me some guidance as to how I'm going to help this crisis, how I'm going to let this family solve this problem. And The following week, this young girl came back and said, I did what you said, Dr. Georgette, and it worked. So those are the moments that just make us all smile, but we've got to create a community of caring in order for mental health to be encouraged and facilitated.
And I think that is so important, that point, that idea of creating this community of caring in our parishes. I know that certainly you and Father Jerry in your parish have worked very hard on that and have done that. What happens, and I'm going to ask kind of a hard question here, but I feel like I want to ask it for the people that are in a community that hasn't done that work, that perhaps people aren't as accepting about mental health issues, that perhaps there's not as much acceptance, or if you come forth and talk to the priest, he's not quite sure what to do, how to help you and stuff. What advice do we have for the people that maybe reach out to the church, but get a church that is a little bit still scared with this issue or not sure what to do with it? How can they help build that community, despite some of those challenges? And I would ask the second part of that to be if they go for help to their pediatrician, because I know I've heard of people that have gone to discuss these issues, and some pediatricians, not all of them, most of them are really great, but some of them are like, they'll grow out of it, and stuff. So can we give some tools to the families that kind of hit a wall when they try to reach out for help? Because usually it took a mammoth effort to ask for help. And then when they hit that wall, it's like, well, So I guess both in the church and in the community. I talked too long, sorry. Go.
Which one of us wants to go first?
I'll go first. I guess I would say my advice to someone who may have reached out even within to the church or whatever and are still wanting some help. I would say look at all of the resources that you have available to you, because like you said, that we have the pediatrician, we have other mental health care professionals within the community who are willing to do that, and then to utilize those people, but to also then invite your priest or your someone that that offers spiritual counsel to you, and to invite them to be a part of the process, and maybe let them know that you're not expecting them to become the mental health care professional, or you're not expecting them to be the pediatrician, but just we want to keep you informed. We want to let you know how this is going. We want you to pray for us, to invite that person in, so that, because sometimes as clergymen, people come to us and we think we have to solve the problem. We have to, and we can't solve all those problems. We're trained in a lot of different things, but I don't have the same skills that Dr. Georgette does, but I'm willing, and there's many times that I will use her as a resource for finding some really good healthcare professionals in the community. And so I will be talking to someone and I know that they need some help and it's beyond my abilities. And so I'll reach out to Dr. Georgette and say, I need a good person. And so I'll get this resource for them and then send them on, and I check back with them to see if they got an appointment, how it's going. And that way, I'm part of this team that's trying to help them, but I know that I can't be every member of that team at the same time.
So what I would add on to that what I was thinking when you first asked the question, Melissa, and we're still responding to your first question, is I think that, as Father Jerry said, keep people who may not have the information in the loop so that they learn what you're doing. But I also think that there are the parent-teacher organizations, there's the Sunday schools, there's lots of folks in the community who probably are struggling with the same issues. And I strongly believe that demystifying the issues around mental health is the most important thing you can do. So to me, that means education. Contact your local children's hospital, contact your local mental health services, and invite a speaker to come in and talk to parents about what's happening, so that you start to break down those barriers and you educate. And it's probably only the people who want to be educated who are going to show up the first time. But it kind of breaks the barriers and helps people to say, well, you know, there's kids struggling in all of our schools. We bring a speaker who people will be comfortable with and start that process of education. You know, start the process of education. The second question you asked is, what if your pediatrician says you're going to outgrow it? Well, that is really how pediatricians used to answer the questions 40 years ago, even 30 years ago. What they're saying is a tincture of time. And we do like to give families and problems a tincture of time. So if my pediatrician told me, unless it was a crisis, that my child would outgrow that, and I wasn't a mental health professional, I would say, how long? And I would think in the terms of 6 to 8 weeks. And if that problem were still there, I would say, my child is not growing it. I really need you to give me the names of some mental health professionals. I'd like to stay on top of this. I think that we're just coming to the point as a society where we question people in authority, like clergy, like physicians, like teachers. And most people just say yes, yes, yes. But I think we need to be willing to say, you told me that the last time I was here, and the problem is still the same. In fact, it's getting worse. I really need a referral. And if you're not going to get it from that pediatrician, the schools are usually helpful. Hopefully you don't have the clergy and the pediatrician in the same community that are both saying we can't help you. But there are help. There's always going to be resources. There's always going to be resources. And usually I would want to start, if I couldn't with my pediatrician, I'd like to talk to my school system. See who do they use. Because I don't like the yellow page approach at all. I don't like dialing into the yellow pages and the first name I see. Sometimes you can get a good referral, frankly, from your insurance company. You know, now that many of us are covered by large insurance companies, they have care coordinators that can also tell them who's listed, who's on their panel. So there's lots of ways to find out. But don't, if your eyes are telling you something different than someone saying they'll outgrow it, and you know that's not happening, you have to go, as a parent, you have to go with your gut. You really have to go with
it. And I think the other question that you can ask in that situation, even if someone is saying they'll outgrow it, is as a parent, so what can I do in the meantime? So while I'm going through, how can I be as supportive as I possibly can to my child? What are the most positive things I can do to respond to them in this situation so that I'm helping them to, you know, to find their way through this, you know, through this situation, this challenge. So it's like, really, so what can I do as well to be a part of their healing?
Going to put on, I think, to pass out later, a place that I think is really, really helpful. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry has a section that's for the lay public, and it's called Facts for Families. And they're alphabetically listed. There's every topic in the world there, from the impact of video games to rock music, to adoption, to how to seek help and how to know when to seek help and who to look for. And it's free, they're easily downloadable, they're written in very understandable language, and they're there for families. They're there to really help families.
If you didn't hear, we're going to email that link to everyone that signed up, and we'll also tie it to this webinar so people can easily access that resource as they need it and stuff. This is really good stuff, and I really, really, really love the point, Father Jerry, you made about the doctor of they'll outgrow it, but then, okay, so what can I do in the meantime to support? I used to work in early intervention for years, and that was a struggle that we had with speech and language referrals, is they'd say, oh, it's gonna come later, it's gonna come and everything, but it's like, but if it doesn't, then what could we do in the meantime, you know, just to give them that boost? If it comes in and it's fine, that's fine, but, you know, we wanna do some stuff proactively. until then. So I think that's a great question to ask. And I think we just need to not be afraid to ask questions as parents. Our pediatricians are trained as doctors. Our clergy are trained in as pastoral care, theology, and to take care of a parish and stuff. But the fact is, no one is the expert in your child like you are. And so we have to, as parents, be able to say, this is my child, and I don't think that what's going on is right, and I really need some more help with this and stuff. So I think as parents, we just have to learn to ask questions, even when it makes us a little uncomfortable. And I don't know if there's any final thoughts on that area. I'd like to shift a little bit and talk a little bit about if the mental health issue is actually with the parents themselves, with the adults in the family, and how that impacts things a little bit. If we could talk a little bit about that. I don't know if there's anything else, Georgette and Father Jerry, that we wanted to say along what we've been talking about before we talk a little bit about that. And also, let me put out there, if anybody has any questions, please, by all means, send them over and stuff.
So I do have a final thought that was going through my mind as you were kind of framing the next set of questions. And that is that, and I say this without, I'm a parent, so I say this without putting a lot of guilt. This isn't meant to be a guilt trip for anybody. But we are responsible for kind of steering our children through their development. So just as if we wouldn't sit around with a child who had a high fever and not figure out why are they having a high fever, I'll do everything I can to bring that fever down, but gee, they're looking sicker and sicker. I need to get them to an emergency room. We have the same responsibility to say to our children who are not going to be any more dying to go to a therapist's office than they are to go to an emergency room. I'm your parent. I am worrying about you. I can't do this by myself. I'm going to go get some help so that we can all be in a better place. And I think that there's times when I've met a lot of families who just want to be friends with their children or not have their children angry at them. And this is the time when you do see a child who's suffering that you have to step forward as a parent and understand that your role as a parent is to get them the help that they need. Mm-hmm. And not be upset about that or squeamish about that. I must tell you, I've had families who have really not told their children why they're coming to see me or that they're coming to see me, and then I'm stuck with a very volatile situation. I just want to encourage parents to have the same mindset that you would if you had a high fever and it wasn't going down.
Yeah, and I think along those same lines too, we expect kids to get colds, we expect them to get the flu, we expect them to get certain things. And I think if we can have that approach with mental health issues as well, and it's just to say, this happens to people. This is something that happens to people. People do struggle sometimes with anxiety. Sometimes people struggle with being sad. Sometimes people struggle with loss, and to not be afraid of it as an adult, and to let your child know that it's not anything out of the ordinary, but it is something that just like any other thing, we want to help them to be to grow up to be healthy adults. And so when we see certain behaviors and that we want to attend to those things and use all the resources that we have to do so that they can grow up and they'll be able to use those same tools into their adult life as well.
I actually say that to children that I take care of. I say, you're going to be head and shoulders way beyond most grown-ups out there, because you've now got all these tools that you can carry with you for the rest of your life. And they kind of smirk and say, yeah, but they understand that they've got something that they can continue to use.
Yeah, but it takes work to get those tools. That's the thing.
It does. I actually have a magic wand that I keep in my office, and I go up to these very tall, towering teenage boys, and I touch them with this Toys R Us magic wand that's got bubbles in it. And I look at them and I say, and they look at me like, oh man, where'd we land? Where'd my mother bring me? And I say to them, are you cured yet? And they say, no. And I say, yeah, if it were that easy, we'd be done now. I don't have any magic here. You and I are going to work on this together. And it kind of says, as you say, Father Jerry, this isn't we're a society of very quick fixes. And that's not what we need here. So
Yeah,
it's
I
important
think
for families to know that too.
it is great, and to remind people that, you know, patience is the way that we recover from a lot of things, and that we have to look at it in terms of being, you know, small steps, small victories along the way, and that's the way it goes. I had a surgery a few years ago, and I remember standing up on the side of the bed from the first time, and I stood up and I thought, oh my, you've got to be kidding me, because I couldn't take 2 steps. But I mean, but in a couple of days, you know, you're taking a long walk. It takes time to recover, to get over things, and so it just doesn't happen instantly. And I think assuring kids of that in terms of mental health issues also is important, because then they know that they're going to make some progress, but they're going to have some setbacks.
I'd like to just add one more thing, and now I'm speaking solely as a psychologist, and some of my child psychiatry friends and or pharmacy friends may not be happy with what I'm about to say. But because we are a quick fix society, a lot of families just want a pill. And although in the research that we know about serious depression, medication is our first line of defense. The best possible care is medication and therapy. So I do not advocate for people just getting on a medication. It doesn't really teach kids the coping skills. There's no pill in the world that's going to take the time to teach children the coping skills, even if they start feeling a little bit better on medication. So I just want to really suggest to parents that we be comprehensive and take the slow boat here and not look for the quick fix.
Absolutely. But on the same token, sometimes you have people who refuse to use any medication, and that can be to a detriment as well, because sometimes you need both of those things working together in those situations, so that somebody is able to, you know, engage in the therapy and the counseling that will help to give them the tools to keep moving ahead too.
Very, very, very true. We took you off your course, Melissa. You were asking.
That's okay. You know what? And I'm actually looking at the time. I don't think we're going to go to the adult portion, but I do want to do a couple things before we leave here. And one of them is I want to probably do what's probably the most prescriptive thing we're going to do here. But Georgette, could you speak to when a child or a teenager or an adult might be suicidal or might be harming a person? What is exactly what we should do? Because that's the only time we say, this is what you need to do then. So
I'm happy to do that. If a child is talking about harming themselves, or someone else, even if it is in response to being disciplined, being put in their room, being talked to by a parent in an angry manner, if they say, well, I'm just going to kill myself. It may sound like a flip response, right? It may sound like a flip response. So that's one end of the continuum. Then we have kids who have written a note, have told their friends, have put something on a computer. I am not capable of differentiating those two scenarios if I do not have a chance to evaluate that child. So that child needs to be seen sooner rather than later. Now, we happen to be fortunate in that we put together an emergency room area where we have nothing but mental health therapists who can walk in, families can walk in there night and day and get an assessment of, does this child need to be hospitalized? Are they unsafe? children, once they've said that, will talk and back out of it. Oh, I didn't really mean that. Oh, when they see you react and they're like, I didn't mean to say that. I don't think there's a parent on this planet that wants to be responsible for saying they were just kidding. I've seen too many stories go south with that. That child needs to be evaluated. That's when, if they're not in any kind of mental health counseling, you go to your emergency room if you have to, you talk to your pediatrician, see if you can get an emergency appointment. You don't leave that. You try to get an evaluation of how serious are these threats. And it's a tough one. It's a very tough call, but we go to, I'd rather be safe than sorry. And I'm just very, very adamant about that because of this purpose. Children are impulsive. So what they may have said an hour ago may escalate in another hour. For sure, I wouldn't leave that child alone. Mm-hmm. So if I couldn't get help that very day, I'd be on my guard with them until I got them somewhere. And I know you might think I'm being very hyper, but I come from having done this for a whole career. So does that help?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important. Thank you very much with that. We did have a question that came in, and it's actually about an online Orthodox Facebook group that's for mothers. And it talks about, in this group, a lot of mothers sometimes share their children's difficult behaviors. The person that's writing this is a mental health practitioner, and she's sensitive to the signs of mental health issues, yet she's hesitant to post responses that might hint towards the need for help. In this world of social media and some resistance to see mental health issues as just spiritual issues and not acknowledge the importance of mental health, how do we respond in this kind of environment?
Wow, that's a tough one.
It is.
So
I will say, though, I'm part of this group, and it is a serious issue that comes up a lot. So
you have the ability, naive as I am about all these things, you have the ability to do a message to a particular individual, do you not?
Yes.
So if I wanted to send a message, I would, if they knew that I was a mental health professional, and of course this could backfire because that person could take that message and post it back to the group. But I would craft a very careful message to the individual who's talking about those problems. I would say, you know, I'm so-and-so, I'm a mental health professional, and I have some concerns about the issues that you're posting. I would like to recommend that you share these with your pediatrician, with your clergy, and see whether there's a reason to seek the mental health services. Because I wouldn't be, or I would remove myself from the group. Mm-hmm. To me, those would be the two choices. Because despite the fact that's not your patient, if it's being posted there and you see it, and clearly the person asking the question is uncomfortable with what is it I should do, mm-hmm. I think you have to err to your professional judgment. Mm-hmm. You have to go to your professional judgment. And if that person says, I didn't need that information, I didn't want to hear that from you, I would sadly to say, I would remove myself from that group.
And I think I'm going to ask you for the other end of that. You know, that was from a mental health professional that's in the group, as wearing two hats, as both probably a mother and a mental health professional. As mothers that are in these groups, how do we learn the appropriate use of these groups when we're dealing with issues with our children and stuff? It seems that sometimes some oversharing occurs, and maybe this is, maybe I'm getting off, but I'm just trying to think through the other end of it is, even though we see this group as private, I'm not sure those groups are always private. I don't know if you've seen, yeah.
I guess my question is, is the people in those groups or whatever, any of those kind of groups have to ask themselves, why am I sharing this information? Am I sharing this information because I have a concern and because I have a question about about my child, about this thing, and I'm open to hearing from other people, or am I sharing this information just so that I can like get my own confirmation that what I'm thinking and what I'm doing is the right thing, even if, and then I'm really not open to, to a challenge or, or anybody else's opinion. But I mean, I think Georgette has the best, the best solution, and that's what I would do too. And I've done that in those kind of situations where I've seen things and, then tried to contact somebody on a one-on-one basis, either with a phone call or some kind of personal message or some way to reach out to them and say, hey, I have a concern. Are you okay? Because I don't think, some of those, not all questions should be discussed, and publicly, even though that's sort of like the way the society and culture is going on social media.
And
Everything.
I think it's what we kind of said at the beginning of this webinar is knowing the limitations. This is a webinar where we're giving information about mental health, but if you have mental health issues, this is not going to fix them by watching this. It might give you some information to go forth and get more help. Just like the social media group, it might have people praying for you and help you, but you still have to do something outside of that group to get help and stuff. So if you're posting to think that you're getting help other than prayers, we have to really look at the fact that what are the next steps that you need to take in the real world, not the social media world, to go forth, because it's a lot safer sometimes to just post something as opposed to going in and saying, I need help.
It is, but just even the act of saying something about it is a really good first step.
Yeah.
And so hopefully if there's somebody that's listening today that, is wondering what their next step is, hopefully we've said some things today that give them the courage to take the next step, whether it's reaching out to a physician or a mental health care professional or their priest to say, this is my struggle, and I'm hoping that you'll go with me on this journey to a healthier way of life.
Wonderful. I'm looking at the time. Do either of you have any closing thoughts?
My closing thought is just after doing this for over 40 years, I still remain very optimistic about people's ability to change, especially children's ability to change. And I remain very optimistic about the role of our faith in helping us to move forward and conquer the issues that come before us. And so I guess what I'm saying is that when it feels too big to a family, know that there's help available from your clergy, from people in the mental health community, and that change is very possible. There are wonderful techniques out there to help children and families, and I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't believe in it, and continue to train people to do the very, very best work. The other comment I would make as a mental health professional is if you go and seek a mental health professional and you don't click and you don't think that person can help you, find someone else. I feel very strongly about that. If your gut says, I don't know how this person can help me, I'm not getting good vibes from them, I really like therapy to be a match and a fit. So you have my complete permission to, quote, fire your therapist and move on.
That's awesome. That's a great advice. Thank you.
That is great advice. I would just encourage people to be open, and not be afraid of their own truth or their own issue that they're struggling with, because sometimes it's when we keep it a secret that it grows. And and so sometimes just holding on to things that we might be struggling with and not sharing them turns it into this big monster. And actually, if we're finally willing to call it what it is in the presence of another person, it sometimes it turns out to be not so scary and not such a huge burden that we can't overcome it. And so I share with Dr. Georgette her optimism I've seen so many people be able to change and overcome things that they never thought they could. And they have a lot more strength and reserves and resilience than they think that they do.
Thank you so much. I can't thank you both enough. That was really wonderful. Like I said, that we could probably stay here on this for a couple hours and still only scratch the surface. We're hoping to do more of these conversations and get in deeper to some of the things and practicalities surrounding some of these issues. As I said, this will be posted probably in about a week with some discussion questions. Continue this conversation. Sit down with your priest, watch this webinar together, get a group of parents together, watch it, continue discussing it. That's what these webinars are for and stuff. And we hope that you can continue these conversations in your home and in your church. So that, like Father Jerry said, we bring these things to light and we don't let them grow and hide them under, a bushel and stuff. So again, I thank you both so much. Again,
thanks for inviting me.
Thank Leadership 100 and you faithful stewards. I also want to let you know that next month we will have a webinar, and I'm struggling to find the date. I think it's like in the first couple weeks of December. I think it's the like second or third week of December, forgive me. And we're having Father Tom and Presbytera Pat Sagalakis, and they're going to be talking about compassion, which I think will be a great topic to explore during this nativity season, and continue on this topic of mental health and stuff. So keep an eye out for that. Log on to our website, our Facebook page, so you can keep up to date on the different things we have coming out. So thank you all very much, and we will see you next month. Bye.
Bye-bye.